There is a great and proud tradition of American writers, including some of the world's most famous authors. Welcome to WatchZilla. Today we are going to give you our top 11 best American writers. For one thing, when you are ranking the best books by one author, the scope is fairly narrow. All of the books generally share the same style. When you get into ranking authors, however, a long list of variables comes into play: time period, style, personality, genre, production. The American authors on this list span nearly a century and have written some of the most iconic books in American literature. Novels, plays, and poems pour out of the United States with increasing numbers of women, African American, Native American and Hispanic writers making a strong contribution. There have been 12 Literature Nobel Prize laureates, beginning with Sinclair Lewis in 1930 to Bob Dylan in 2016. Other American writers who were laureates include such household names as T.S. Eliot, Ernest Hemingway, and John Steinbeck. American writers' contribution to English literature is incalculable. Number 11. Herman Melville. A novelist, short story writer, and poet of the American Renaissance period, Herman Melville is widely considered to have been unappreciated in his time and throughout his life. New York City-born Melville is best remembered for his 1851 masterpiece Moby Dick, an epic novel about a ferocious whale that destroys a whaling ship, its vengeful captain and crew. His whaling novel, Moby Dick, is often spoken of as the great American novel, vying with Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby and Mark Twain's Huckleberry. His work garnered greater success after his death. Number 10. Harper Lee. Harper Lee, much like J.D. Salinger, is famous essentially for one novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. Published in 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird won Lee the Pulitzer Prize in 1961, and nearly 5 decades later the Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contribution to literature. It may seem odd for someone who has only published 2 books to be placed on a list of best American authors, but when the first of those 2 books sells over 40 million copies and the second, Go Set a Watchman, a rediscovered manuscript from the 1950s that was published in 2015, adds 3 million more, the evidence is clear. A childhood friend of fellow author Truman Capote, Lee also assisted with some of the research for his book In Cold Blood. Number 9. Emily Dickinson. Unknown as a poet during her lifetime, Emily Dickinson is now regarded by many as one of the most powerful voices of American culture. One of the nation's most prolific poets, Dickinson wrote nearly 1,800 poems while leading a reclusive life at her family's home in Amherst, Mass. Her poetry has inspired many other writers, including the Bronx. Few of Dickinson's poems about art, gardens, joy, love, death and grief were published during her lifetime, and most of her work was discovered in her bedroom after her death. In 1994, the critic, Harold Bloom, listed her among the 26 central writers of Western civilization. Number 8. Henry James. Henry James is regarded as one of the key figures of 19th-century literary realism. Though he became a British citizen in the last year of his life, Henry James is regarded as one of the greatest American novelists of all time. A shy boy who was a book addict, Henry James was regarded as one of the most skillful writers of short stories in America by the time he was in his mid-20s. As a young man, he spent a lot of time in Europe and eventually settled in England, becoming a British citizen in 1915, 1 year before his death. James was a prolific writer. He is noted for writing from a character's point of view, which allowed him to explore consciousness and perception. His imaginative use of point of view, interior monologue and unreliable narrators brought a new depth to narrative fiction, all of which were influential on the writing of the novelists who followed him. During the 50 years of his literary career, he produced a body of tales and novels that fills 36 volumes of non-fiction prose. The later phase of his writing is regarded as the peak of his achievement. In it, he produced 3 of his most acclaimed novels: The Wings of the Dove, The Ambassadors and The Golden Bowl. James is also known for his novella The Turn of the Screw, which is one of the most analyzed and ambiguous ghost stories in the English language. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize for Literature 3 times. Number 7. J.D. Salinger. After brief periods at New York and Columbia Universities, Jerome David Salinger devoted himself entirely to writing. His stories began to appear in periodicals in 1940. In 1942, Salinger was drafted into the United States Army. During the Second World War, he saw combat with the 12th Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division. He was present at Utah Beach on D-Day, in the Battle of the Bulge and the Battle of Hurtgen Forest. His most famous work, The Catcher in the Rye, was partially published in serial form in 1945 to 1946 and as a novel in 1951. It was an immediate popular success and has since then been consistently rated as one of the greatest novels of the 20th century. However, the success of The Catcher made Salinger reclusive due to the unwanted attention and scrutiny. He followed the novel with a collection of short stories titled 9 Stories, which was critically acclaimed and helped shape writers like Philip Roth, John Updike and Harold Brodkey. The last work Salinger published during his lifetime was a novella titled Hapworth 16, 1924, which appeared in The New Yorker in 1965. Number 6. Mark Twain. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, far better known as Mark Twain, was an American writer, businessman, publisher and lecturer. Known for his witty and satirical prose and the colloquial dialogue of his characters, Twain has been dubbed the father of American literature. He progressed from his day job as pilot of a Mississippi riverboat to legend of American literature. His work shows a deep seriousness, and at the same time, it is hilariously satirical, as seen in his many quotes on all aspects of life. Twain was inspired to write his classic novels The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, based on his childhood experiences in Hannibal and his job as a Mississippi River steamboat pilot. His masterpiece is the novel, Huckleberry Finn, which is regularly referred to as the Great American Novel. A humor award is handed out each year in his name. Number 5. Ernest Hemingway. Ernest Hemingway was raised in Oak Park, Illinois. During World War I, he worked as an ambulance driver, was wounded and had to return home. Hemingway worked as a journalist for a number of years before becoming a novelist. His first published novel The Sun Also Rises received mixed reviews but is now considered an iconic modernist work. He went on to produce some of the best-known novels and short stories of 20th-century American literature. His last major work in fiction, The Old Man and the Sea, won the 1953 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and is widely regarded as a 20th-century classic. Hemingway also wrote a number of non-fiction works including Death in the Afternoon and A Movable Feast. In 1954, Ernest Hemingway was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his mastery of the art of narrative, most recently demonstrated in The Old Man and the Sea, and for the influence that he has exerted on contemporary style. The modern writing style of Hemingway had a huge influence on 20th-century fiction. He is widely regarded as one of the greatest American writers of all time. Number 4. Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison lived one of the most well-rounded literary lives on this list. With an English degree from Harvard University and a master's in American literature from Cornell, she jumped right into a career in books. Toni Morrison's novels are known for their vivid dialogue, their detailed characters and epic themes. By the late 1960s, Random House, one of the largest publishers in the industry, named Morrison the fiction editor, the first black female to carry that distinction. Over the course of her writing career, she penned 11 novels to go along with 7 children's books and several non-fiction books. Her most famous novel is the 1987 novel, Beloved. She was awarded both the Pulitzer Prize and the American Book Award in 1988 for Beloved and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1993. He passed away in August 2019 at the age of 88. Number 3. William Faulkner. William Cuthbert Faulkner came from an old Southern family and grew up in Oxford, Mississippi. The young Faulkner was greatly influenced by the history of his family and the region in which he lived. He began writing poetry in adolescence. However, it was as a novelist that he achieved success. In particular, his set of novels set in his fabricated Yoknapatawpha County bought him fame and popularity. His 1954 novel A Fable won the Pulitzer Prize as well as the National Book Award. He won another Pulitzer Prize for his last novel The Reivers. Moreover, William Faulkner was awarded the 1949 Nobel Prize for Literature for his powerful and artistically unique contribution to the modern American novel. He donated part of his Nobel money to establish a fund to support and encourage new fiction writers, eventually resulting in the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction. In 1998, 3 of his novels were ranked by the Modern Library on its list of the 100 best English-language novels of the 20th century: The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, and Light in August. William Faulkner is widely acclaimed as one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, unmatched for his extraordinary structural and stylistic resourcefulness. Number 2. F. Scott Fitzgerald. Francis Scott Fitzgerald was an American novelist, widely regarded as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, American writers of the 20th century. F. Scott Fitzgerald was often overlooked during his short life. A friend of Ernest Hemingway from their time together in Paris during the 1920s, Fitzgerald took the young writer under his wing and introduced him to Max Perkins, his editor at Scribner's. From that point on, Fitzgerald took a back seat to Hemingway and others. His first novel, This Side of Paradise, got him onto the scene, and his second, The Beautiful and the Damned, established him as an author to remember. It seemed he was destined to be a household name for years to come. Interestingly enough, his third novel, The Great Gatsby, garnered underwhelming reception upon its 1925 release. He is best known for his novel, The Great Gatsby, which viewed for the title Great American Novel, with Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn and Herman Melville's Moby Dick. It wasn't until decades later, after Fitzgerald's death in 1940, that The Great Gatsby began earning its deserved recognition as one of the greatest American novels ever written. Fitzgerald's place on this list is justified by the fact that his great novel is actually about America. While every author in this list is unique in his or her own, Fitzgerald has a special way of using poetic and perceptive prose in a remarkably accessible way. One can't help but wonder what book his short life of only 44 years kept us from experiencing. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Number 1. John Steinbeck. John Ernst Steinbeck Jr. studied English literature at Stanford University, though he left without a degree in 1925. He then traveled to New York City, where he took odd jobs while trying to write. However, he failed to publish his work, returning to California to work as a tour guide and caretaker at Lake Tahoe. The first novel of Steinbeck, Cup of Gold, was published in 1929. He first achieved critical success with Tortilla Flat in 1935. It was later adapted as a 1942 film of the same name. Steinbeck wrote 33 books in his career, including 16 novels, 6 non-fiction books and 2 collections of short stories. His masterpiece The Grapes of Wrath was published in 1939 and went on to win the National Book Award and Pulitzer Prize for fiction. In 1962, John Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize for Literature for his realistic and imaginative writing, combining as it does sympathetic humor and keen social perception. John Steinbeck is regarded as one of the greatest American authors of the 20th century. Several of his works are considered classics of Western literature and are required reading in American high schools. Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchZilla and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.